Hello, everyone, and welcome to Loving the Moon with Peter Lancett and Julie Grint. And do you want to say hello, Julie?
I'd love to. Hello, everyone.
That's great. So we now introduced ourselves. I'm Peter Lancett, and you've heard Julie say hello. We're talking about loving the moon, and this series of podcasts, which will go on and on and on, we're going to be talking about how we can use the moon for wellness, happiness, well-being, health, and lots of other things that we can use the moon for to improve our lives. And you might wonder how and why that can possibly happen. Some people already know, but some people really don't. And we're going to be talking about a lot of things that might be a little different to a lot of people. But we can start off by looking at the moon as a mirror. And what do we mean by that? Because loving the moon is about synchronizing our lives with the rhythms of nature to flow into wellness, health, and happiness. So where do we take that? What do we really mean by that? How are we going to use the moon?
That's a really good question and a really great place to start. Because when we say to people about, living with the rhythms of nature, so many people are out of touch with that. We live in this modern society where we're so disconnected from it. And yet the moon that is there in the sky pretty much most of the time is pretty much reflecting at us how we can do that. So you'll notice that the moon sometimes is very full, and then sometimes the moon isn't there at all. And when we follow and when we understand those changes in the moon cycle, we can actually set up our lives, our habits, our behaviors, our health, the types of foods that we eat, the things that we do, to kind of follow this sequence, if you like.
That makes... Oh, sorry. Carry on.
Yeah, no, go for it.
I was just going to say, because that makes a lot of sense. The moon reflects the sun for a start. I mean, if we didn't, we wouldn't see it at all, would it? Would we? I mean, that's the fact. Because it's a dark rock up in the sky, about 250,000 miles away. That's not the accurate distance, but thereabouts, 250,000 will do. And so it's reflecting the sun's light. Flexion, not reflection, flexion, if you look it up, means bending, changing and things. Particularly if you're looking at the human body as well. You flex, you can flex. Flexion, reflection is giving it back or giving it to someone else. The sun gives it to the moon gives it to us. I mean, during the daytime, the sun is giving it to us directly, but it's doing something when the moon is out there at night.
This is the thing, we can look at the sun and, we need the sun. The sun is just as important, if not more important. And we're going to talk about that in coming podcasts, aren't we?
Podcasts, we definitely are, yeah.
But, recognizing that the moon actually changes. It has a flow, it has a rhythm, whereas the sun, it comes up, it goes down, it comes up, it goes down. It's pretty much the same all of the time.
Yeah. I mean, we have to look at the fact that the Earth is on a tilt in the sky. And if it wasn't, we would have the same season all the time, like you do at the equator, pretty much.
Yeah.
But because we are up here and the people in the southern hemisphere, what we get from the sun does differ, but it doesn't differ as quickly. We get quarters, don't we? So we get the run into the way, the new moon runs into the full moon, then we have the full moon, and then the full moon, it begins to wane and it goes down and back again. And that's 29 days, give or take. It's, little bits more. We're going to say something about that in a moment. But the sun, we have the solstices and we have the equinox. So because of the tilt of the Earth, the sun is getting stronger for half the year, and then it's starting to get weaker for another half of the year, literally. And so, for us in the northern hemisphere, where you and I are, we have the solstice late December, which we've just gone past, and we have one in the middle of the summer. So around about the 21st, 22nd of June. And all the celebrations we have at this time of the year, because for those of you who are listening, if you're listening to this at a different time, we're recording this just after Christmas has happened in December of 2024. And what we can say is a lot of the celebrations that religions have at this sort of time of the year were always meant to aim at the solstice. It is the coming of the new Sun King. Well, I'm definitely going to be talking about that in another podcast. And then obviously we have the equinox where the day and the night are at equal times. So we have this different rhythm of nature, even with the sun too. But the moon is there for us all the time. It's moving more quickly. This is not just like an ocean shifting from one side to another. This is happening much more quickly.
And it's that mirror then of us and how changes are constantly occurring in our own bodies, in our own minds, in our own lives, and how important it is for us to allow those changes to happen, how important it is to ebb and flow, to wax and wane like the moon. And this is really, at the crux of everything. When we can understand that, then we can start to use the moon in a way that supports our health and our life on every level.
And we can as well, because what we often do is fight it. When we don't know, I'm not feeling good today. Are you not feeling good? Is that really how things are? You really need to check on that. You need to do some other reflection. You need to go inside and say, am I really not feeling well today? What is actually happening inside, emotionally, physically even? What's going on mentally? We can look at those. And if we reflect, we often use that term, don't we? Reflect. You should reflect on this. And that means like think about it, let it come back to you. Reflection means that what you focus on will give something back to you. You shine. It's like if you go inside, if you meditate or whatever, you're going deep inside you. And it's like you're shining a torch on everything that's in there, in the dark. What you shine your torch on will then reflect something back to you, and you'll get answers.
And this is what I love about the moon, because it's if we feel something on the inside, is it a reflection of what's happening on the outside, and vice versa?
And it can well be. We don't know until we test that out.
Yeah.
and we're going to talk about that as well in subsequent podcasts. And we're going to talk about how to do this and methods of doing this and things that will make that work. We look at them. I mean, when we hear words that we think are just there all the time, like reflection, makes good sense to go to a damn good dictionary and have a look at all the meanings of it. And then think about, well, what does that really mean for me? How does that work for me? How does that work for what we're getting from nature? Let's say nature. We won't just keep saying the sun, the moon, and that, because it's everything. We can look like Leonardo da Vinci did at every rhythm of nature. He would look at blades of grass and see them grow, watch them develop, and that flow of ebb and flow of growing and dying and growing and dying and so on. And then underneath the ground is that dark moon point where the seed germinates and starts, right, it's time to come up, and all the rest. We'll talk about things like this in more detail, obviously, won't we? But that, these are really good things to the way that I look at the moon. It's like it's giving us access to things. It's really giving us access to lots of things that we sometimes don't realize, and then we end up fighting against. If you fight against nature, are you going to win? How strong is the universe compared to you? If you fight against nature, you're ending up fighting against everything.
Absolutely.
The natural things in the world around you, the flora and the fauna and everything, but probably the distant galaxies as well, because the universe, without us trying to analyze it, just goes about its flow.
Exactly.
If we're fighting against anything, whether we know we are or we're not, then we're fighting against the whole universe. There's a good reason why fighting against nature doesn't tend to work. Well, it doesn't work out well.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it anyway, and I'm sure others don't. And what I love about the moon, it's not just this dark rock, is it, in the sky? It's there reminding us that there is a rhythm. You'll see me every day and every night. I'm a big thing in the sky, and I'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. I'll get smaller and smaller. Oh, and whoops, you can't see me. And oh, here I come back again. It's reminding us that nature has rhythms. It's it's like a conductor of an orchestra.
Yes.
The conductor that guides the orchestra and in its own rhythms. And if we are playing our own violin, and we're not paying attention to the conductor, then we're going to be kicked out of the orchestra, or everybody else in the orchestra will be against us.
I love that analogy.
Isn't it good? I just don't know where that came
fabulous. But one of the so I was just going to say, one of the biggest aspects of this that we tend to fight against the most, which is why I love working with the moon, because it brings our attention to it the most, are the emotions.
Yeah.
And that's what tends to be the driving force that's underneath everything that we either do or we don't do.
I think so too. I mean, we've had experience of that. I mean, as a hypnotherapist, a hypnotist, from the therapeutic point of view, I'm always looking at the emotional catch of what people want to change with. Because if I can get them to change the emotional reaction to whatever it is they come to me for help for, then it's a doddle. The job can be done very, very quickly. And that's what I use hypnosis to do. It is always the emotions that we're looking at in that, more than anything else.
More than anything else. And you'll hear often, and this is why it's really important that we start this podcast off explaining what loving the moon really means, because that aspect of loving the moon or following the moon, or however you might have learned to start using it yourself in your own life, we believe has become quite distorted along the way. And you'll often hear people, you might see memes, jokes, things like that, blaming the moon for the way that someone blaming the moon for the way that they feel. And the moon cannot make you feel anything, just like anybody else in your life. It's not responsible for how you feel. When we start to work in line with nature, in line with the moon's rhythms, then we can start to become more in tune with our own bodies and our own emotions and start to use them to our advantage, rather than being swept along with the current all of the time.
This is true. I mean, and we can look at the moon in different ways. And certainly, if you look at shamanic cultures in the world, everything is alive. Everything. There's nothing dead in the universe. Everything. It has intelligence. Just because we can't decipher that in certain things doesn't mean it's not true. The moon does have these things, but the moon, in my experience, is not sitting up there looking at us as individuals and saying, I'm going to turn you into a werewolf tomorrow. When I'm full, I'm going to turn you into a werewolf. Or I'm going to make you have a bar fight. I'm going to make you aggressive, violent, and all the chaotic things that do happen. Is there any truth in this? Well, the Los Angeles Police Department doesn't give any of its cops the opportunity to have time off on a full moon. You can go and call them up and ask them why that is. But they know over time that there's all kinds of chaotic things that happen at that time of the month. Now, they won't go into any shamanic reasoning or science or any of that. They just know that when the moon's full, there's probably more chance that there's going to be fights and all kinds of criminal activity and bad feelings going on. These things do happen, and it's not just whether the science says so. It's not whether the research in psychology says so. All I can say is that the LAPD and other police departments, by the way, but they're a giant police department, they don't base it on science or research or psychological research in universities. They just say, we know that over time, and we've come to realize that there's a lot of trouble at that time of the month. And so we're just making sure we've got enough people on the ground to deal with it. That's it. I think that tells you more than anything that happens in a lab. That's just my opinion on that one. But I will go for it. And there are other institutions, and particularly law and order institutions, that go that way. It used to be a case, I believe, that mental asylums, as they used to be called, or nut houses, whatever you want to call them, they definitely operated with more focus on what was going on with their inmates, as calling them inmates as though they're prisoners, but whatever the heck. They were definitely taking more of an approach, and people who were in there because of violent psychotic behavior, they would definitely keep to one side. It used to be the case. I don't know if that still is the case now, but that used to be the case. We don't know. We'll have to watch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest again, I guess.
We have our own theories and ideas around that, don't we?
We do.
And there's no shadow of doubt that there is an influence, an energetic influence.
I think so. And I mean, there's this other idea that the moon is there to like say, look at me, watch what I do, and then you can learn to associate yourself with all of these rhythms of nature. And if you stay in line with those rhythms, you're going to be 1,000 times better than you normally are. And it doesn't tell you how. It's not that. I mean, this association of gods and goddesses with the moon, and by the way, gods as well, we should talk about that, because this feminine influences has taken people right into a cul-de-sac, a lot of people. But, you know, the most of the, well, in my opinion, in my case, virtually every moon goddess is associated with the moon. Diana, Artemis, Ishtar, Isis, started off as sun gods, sun goddesses. And as society turned around, and I'm not going to go into any detail on this podcast about this, but as society turned around, one of the ways that happened quickly in history, that we turned from a gynecologist, whatever you call it, society into a patriarchal society, was by, boom, let's take the things that people are made to worship and change it.
Yeah.
So Diana and Artemis and people and goddesses like that. And then in the Celtic world, that happened as well with goddesses like Arianrhod and Vlodaiwerth and people like this. I mean, we will go into some of that in later podcasts.
And this is the point we want to get across. The moon isn't there for you to worship. I mean, you can if you want. We're not saying don't. We want to show you how to utilize it. You know, it's a part of nature. You're a part of nature. So it's about bringing all parts of you together as one. It's not there to, you know, just hand over to, you know, I find much of the modern moon type work out there can be very disempowering and misleading. Yeah.
It will be because people have been given strange beliefs, especially from the late 1960s, when this like counterculture revolution had started to take place, particularly in America, particularly in California, when that needed to be shut down. Again, we won't go into the detail here, but when that needed to be shut down, one of the ways they knew to do was they had to create little caves that they could lead people into and get them to believe in it. We'll talk about that in another podcast, but this does happen. I would suggest that these goddesses are not the moon. I would suggest if you want to be in this world, and I bear in mind, I've been in this world, this alternative world, for over 40 years. So yeah, I do know what I'm talking about in this sense, but don't see the moon as a goddess. Don't see goddesses as being part of the moon. Certain aspects of deities, let's call them, doesn't matter whether we're talking about men or women, because by the way, a lot of cultures, still pagan, always kept the moon as a male deity, as a male association. Have a look at Viking culture for a start. But in Central America, in the Pacific Islands, in Japan, the moon was considered masculine, the sun was feminine. We are going to go into that in another podcast as well, and the importance of that and why we should change the way we look at things. Because yes, we're talking about loving the moon in these podcasts, but it isn't just about the moon, is it? I would suggest to people that if you want to give thanks to a deity that you align with the moon, don't see that deity as being attached to the moon or a part of the moon. See it as being a deity that's giving you a pathway into seeing the rhythms of the moon and how those rhythms can help you. So, you know, if you are looking at Artemis or if you're looking at Arianrhod in reflection, and definitely that one's reflection, when you're in the glass castle and so on. But you know, when you're there, then it's different. You don't attach it. See the moon as being separate. The moon, by the way, is big. It's going to have huge intelligence, and we don't understand it. We don't need to understand it, do we? Do you want to spend your life looking at that? I don't know. Maybe some people do. Be hard to find. Literally, what we can do is use what it's reflecting the sun to us to remind us of rhythms of nature, which will allow us to grow emotionally, mentally, physically, health, well-being, happiness, boom, all of those come together. And I think if you put all of them together, then happiness is the one at the end that we all end up with. If you're healthy, if your well-being is great, if your lifestyle's fantastic, if you're in control of your emotional life, you're going to end up being happy whether you like it or not.
I love that.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So we have got a lot to talk about, and we will digress a little from the moon at times. But the moon's always going to be at the heart of these podcasts because it's a thing that's right up there, and it is up there. If you look at the science of what the moon is and when it came here and so on, there's lots and lots of different ideas, none of which seem to work. And I always love the quote there's a NASA physicist, and obviously NASA is involved with space, and he was involved with the moon. And he said the only way you can really look at how the moon got there and what it is to understand, just tell yourself that the moon doesn't even exist. He says, because there is absolutely no way that we can work out how that rock ended up there in one orbit, which has its one face to us all the time, and so on. It says it's impossible. If it was caught by gravity, we're in trouble.
And that's the mirror, isn't it? That's the reflection. If you think about it, we can stand here, we can stand very still, just like the moon. And yet there is energy, there is movement constantly happening and changing inside of us.
Yes, of course. And I think that's the same with the moon. Well, no scientists have ever worked out where that rock has come from at all. Ever. And that's yet another story.
Another story, yeah.
I'll tell you what, I mean, if people want to look at it, there's a great book called Who Built the Moon? And it's fantastic because it doesn't actually try to come up with some strange pseudo conspiracy theory or whatever you want to call it. It literally just lists mathematical facts, physical facts of why it can't be there. And then you get quotes from all these astrophysicists who are saying, we're scratching our heads. There are plenty of theories that are in place, but believe me, they're theories that don't work. Not one of them. Not one of them. So, don't get hung up on any of them. So, yeah, and they say, it would be important where it is. And, you get those little things that are also, as if it isn't bad enough where it is in orbit, you get these things that it's like 1/400th of the distance between the Earth and the Sun, and which is why, and it's like a 1/400th of the size of the Sun, which is why when we get an eclipse, it literally is the exact same size in the sky as we see the Sun. Boom. How did that happen by coincidence and accident? I will just leave that one with everybody because all of the scientists are scratching their heads about that and saying, if you counted up every microatomic particle in the universe, there aren't enough to give us the proper odds of gambling on that happening. Like I say, if you're really fascinated by this, as I was, get hold of that book called Who Built the Moon, because it really is. It's difficult to know where it comes. All we need to know is, A, it is there. B, it does have an effect on us, doesn't it? It has an effect on us, on every aspect of nature on the surface of this planet. I don't know what it does below the surface of this planet, but it certainly has that effect.
And it makes sense that there will be some kind of change that we do experience as those energies shift. What does the moon, if we say the moon does something, what does it actually do to the planet?
Well, it certainly pulls water here, there, and everywhere.
Exactly. And what are we, right? We consist of pretty much water.
Well, yeah, what is it, about 70% totally water, and the brain is something like, I don't know, even more, isn't it? 80, 90%, whatever it is. Yeah. And so if it can pull the Pacific Ocean from one side to the other, it can certainly have an effect on your brain. Now, how does the brain work? I'm not a qualified neuroscientist, but I've read plenty of books on this, and it's electrical pathways between the neurons, the brain cells, the neurons in the brain. And what's a great conductor of electricity? Water.
Water.
Isn't that strange? And so we've got a brain that's mostly water that uses electricity to send messages between all of the neurons within the brain. And some parts of a day, we might feel a lot different than we do at other parts. Just saying.
But again, it comes back, doesn't it, Pete, to be mindful and to stay tuned to these podcasts where we can teach you and show you how to use this information to your advantage, not to sit here and just blame the moon for how we feel, but to, to change our lives for the better.
Well, I actually think that's interesting. Rather than blame it, we should be grateful. We should be worshipping the moon. Oh, did I say earlier on that we should?
That's going to have everyone confused.
I know, but I'm very confusing at the best of times. What I'd look at, though, is, it is part of the universe. Whatever it is, it's part of the universe, and it's in line with the rhythms of the universe at this moment. That's its alignment, where it should be. Who knows whether some electromagnetic effect later on will take it spinning out of our orbit and it'll belong to somebody else or just off on its own way. We don't know, doesn't really matter. But there are changes. Changes do occur. And we have written evidence. I won't go into where from now, but otherwise we'd be going way off, that there are times in our written history, this isn't just like some oral horror. We know that in different parts of the world that did not have communication, China, Rome, for example, Central America, we're talking about,
Mm.
maybe 1,500, 2,000 years ago, where they were changing calendars, they were doing all kinds of things. And guess what? The moon's phases came to about 35 to 36 days for this period, and then dropped back into where we are now, 29 days. Very fascinating. Yes, so we have written history. It's not just some strange pagan mythology that you want to call a lie. No, it's not. We know that it's true. We know that it happened. It would be very, very difficult to say that at the exact same time in history, on the same timeline, that all of these peoples around the world had this problem. If you really want to know about that, there are other books that you can read. But it is true, and it is true that there were times when we struggled with that. And there are other things that we struggle with as well. But, so that's a recent time. I mean, historically, that's not like geology, where we're talking about tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago and something slowly happened. It happened. And we know that because we do have documentation from very civilized societies. The Egyptians weren't thick. Have a look.
Yeah.
Nobody in the Middle East was. China, they weren't thick. I mean, if you think of like a lot of the stuff that we've got that turned us into a civilization, most of it's coming out of the East from us. China, India, the Middle East, like Iraq, as it now is, Babylon and Sumer, places like that, Egypt, ancient Egypt, and then we ended up with Greece, and then, the Roman Empire and so on, and the Celts were bringing stuff in. But this mathematical science was coming from these places. They're the places that are telling you, hang on, we're scratching our heads here. Something's happened to the moon. Its orbits now, it's turning up and going away again in a much longer time scale, in an extra 6 or 7 days. Something happened, didn't it? So all I'm saying is that if things like that can happen as quickly as that, we just don't know how long the moon's going to be there. But while it's there for us now, we might as well make use of it.
Absolutely. And there is something else, isn't there, that's kind of glaringly obvious that we haven't quite touched on yet, is this connection with the feminine menstrual cycle. And is that, really connected to the moon? Are we connected to it? Or is the moon there to help guide us through our own natural internal rhythms and cycles?
But I think it is there to help to guide us. I don't think it's making that happen.
No, I totally agree.
I really don't. And my experience of the women I've known is they haven't all had a 29 and a quarter day cycle. They just haven't. And I do know that there's research where communities of women do tend to line up with each other. And I don't know how that works, but there is evidence that does happen.
I have a theory around that. I'm sure
Well,
that'll be another
I was going to
podcast.
say in another podcast, I would love us to talk about that because that would be really interesting.
Well,
And
it's the
so
same as
we
when you
should.
get a bunch of people in a room together and they may all develop the same symptoms. Let's call it a cold, if you will. And then you can put other people in a room and they won't develop those same symptoms. So change is going on in the body all of the time.
All the time. That's right. By the way, I would also suggest that you can't spend 24 hours a day looking at this. What kind of life would you have?
But also to raise the point, and, we touched on this at the start and just coming back to it now, is, really to emphasize to people, and this is to people, it's to men and women, that this isn't just some feminine tool or aspect of ourselves. It is for everyone. We are all a part of nature and we can all utilize the moon to our advantage.
And we are going to talk about that as well, Julie, this idea of, differences between men and women, but also the unknown and very, very lightly spoken of aspects that are the same.
Yeah.
If these podcasts and the work that we do are not just aimed at women, probably more women than men will listen and take part, because that's the nature of the society that we're currently caged in. But if we can break people out of that and particularly, if men are interested, they should know, because they can increase their well-being massively by following these paths. We hear a lot now about women's menstrual cycles and then the approach and the times when, I don't feel good and there's cramps and this, that, and the other. Do you think that men go through a cycle of time where everything's fantastic? Try again. I tell you what, if you're in a relationship, man and a woman in a relationship, and the woman has a really bad time every month, yours isn't going to be brilliant either, is it? It just isn't.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things that we should talk about, and I think one of the things we can emphasize is that moon up there. What it does for us doesn't only do it for half the population of the world. It does it for all of us, and this is why, in the past, in our mythological history, in our ancient history, it wasn't just women that were manning the temples, and you look at the gods that were given the sun's idea. Apollo and so on like this. That these were female deities, the Vestal Virgins. All of these. I should talk about virginity at some point as well. It's not what we've been told to think, but they were. They look as though that they actually were cults that were run by women. But these are sun gods. Apollo shifted Artemis out of there and said, it's mine now. Or Aphrodite as well. It's like, okay, this is mine now. I'm the one in the chariot, but we've got loads of evidence that it was women coming down in those chariots and dragging the moon and so on. And
there seems to have been a power struggle, and I think we can both agree that us here doing this now is to help restore that balance, to let go of that struggle and return to our own innate power.
I think so, and I think this is the most important thing that we'll do. Certainly one of the most important things we'll do is to reassert the balance between the sun, the moon, and all of nature in the whole universe.
Perfectly said.
What effect a distant galaxy has on an individual here on the Earth, I don't know. Does it have any effect? Well, isn't this the butterfly effect? For those of you that know what the butterfly effect is, isn't that just a bigger version of that? I don't know. But we certainly can talk about the moon and the sun and all of the nature on our planet, because that's where we live. Exactly. And that's where most of the things that we need to work with. I also, we've just got to go with the waves of nature and the waves within ourselves, because it's not all the same. I mean, it's like riding a wave. If you're a surfer and you're riding a wave that's coming in and you're swaying, you're doing those, those tunnels that you go through, the pipes and everything, and you come into the beach and, wow, that was fantastic. Try getting on your surfboard as a 100-foot wave at Navarra in North Portugal is coming at you. That won't work out well, will it? You've got to find a way of going with the flow of it to make it work.
So anyone that's listening who is struggling with their health, who is struggling, to be comfortable with their emotions, we all have challenges in life, but it's often because of this resistance, because somewhere along the way, and I'm not here to lay blame, but somewhere along the way, we've learnt, we've been taught to kind of align ourselves with systems and ways of being that are not natural.
And we're going to talk about those, aren't we?
Yeah, we are indeed. We're not designed to be stagnant and move in straight lines.
No, we're not. And, the thing is that we may be fighting the rhythms of nature without even knowing that we are. Most of the time, that's what happens. So if we can show you how to align with those rhythms, you don't have to worry about fighting.
No more symptoms.
No. Oh, wouldn't that be good? Anyway, I think do you think that's enough of an introduction to what we're going to be looking at? Absolutely. So what we'll do at this point then is we'll say thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you took some things out of this, and I hope you're looking forward to the next podcast and the one after and the one after and the one after. The next two podcasts, we're going to talk about the waning moon, waxing moon. I don't know which order we're going to do it in, but we'll talk about those. Oh, excuse me, I've got a cough. That must be a symptom of me ignoring them. No, we're joking. But we'll say goodbye now to everyone, and thank you for listening in. And so it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
All right, take care now. I'm just going to end the recording. So